Okay, so this is for, let's say they're a left-hand dominant athlete, okay? So generally speaking, it's going to be, depending on their sport, they could have a dominant injury, if you remember from the tennis lecture, or you could have a specific non-dominant injury to the wrist, okay? So it really depends. That tells you which part of the stroke that they're having a problem with, okay, is where their injury is. So if you don't remember that, go back to the tennis lecture and you'll hear me talk about dominant and non-dominant. So this is more for the wrist is hurting. Why generally, if there's no trauma and there's no mechanism of injury, why is the wrist hurting? Overuse, right? Something's happening. They're either muscling the ball, something with the kinetic chain, their stroke mechanic or their throwing mechanics or whatever sport they're in, their body mechanics is off a little. And so there's this they're unable to use the ground reaction forces properly through the kinetic chain, so then they're muscling the ball somehow, or the racket, or the stick, whatever's in their hand, okay? And so if they're just like, okay, my wrist hurts, you have no clear pattern of, is this a tendonitis, an early tendonitis? There's no fracture, obviously, because there's likely no mechanism of injury. And we just need a little stability, right? So maybe you're thinking there's a carpal sprain going on in here, some kind of ligament that is just overused or injured, or maybe there's some synovitis within the joint you think is a little irritated, or maybe this is a more mature athlete and we're dealing with some early onset osteoarthritis that we want to try to help stabilize. So what we're going to do is we would use spray. Okay, so anytime we're taping, it's really wise to use spray. Now, if they're just going out for like a light hit or practice and they don't want to spray, that's okay, because what we're going to do here is we're going to remind them to use a wristband. And the wristband will help to keep the tape in place as it loosens. But if really this is an athlete going out to play on a more competitive level, you don't want to be back out there because this loosened or it shifted because you didn't spray, okay? So what we would do here is we would roll off, so we have them hold their hand out with fingers open. So sometimes you'll see trainers like have them kind of put their fingers into your belly or chest just to kind of make sure we've got good expansion, because we don't want to limit the ability of the muscles to contract, okay? So that's why we do that versus like a limp wrist. And so I put them into kind of like a neutral position, really easy wrap. Now you have a couple options here. I usually will go with my 1.5 inch. The key here is to kind of know where you are on the underside. Don't get into their hands, and you don't even need to go that low. Okay, if they need a little added, which most people do, because that white is going to loosen over time, you could add a little bit. Again, know where you are on the underside of the hand. And then, now, generally I would close this with Leukotape if I felt, okay, they're not going to put a wristband or anything over that. But if most of my tennis players have wristbands, so in that sport, I would say let's just throw one over there. If it's in competition, though, I'm going to close it because I don't need any, slipping. Or from here, you could now just put the wristband on top, and that sort of secures everything in place. Okay, gives a little compression so it stays on. And then what this is going to do is it's going to limit the ability of the carpals to sort of shift in place. It's going to limit some of the end range of motion of the wrist, which is okay because one of those directions usually has pain, right? So you're blocking them from getting into the painful range. They can still extend. They're just not going to extend 100% to create whatever stress or strain is across the wrist, Okay, so this is just a general way that we could just lock all the carpals in and create a little compression and stability and blocking. Okay, now if they felt like, ugh, that white tape was too much, you could always just back it down to these two. It's just not going to give as tight a compression, right? Because the Liplast is a little more malleable, more flexible, okay? But still can be put on kind of tight, right? Medium strength to give that person a sense of stability, okay? Now, if this is a more mature athlete with early onset OA, they might not like this white tape, right? Because now you've pushed the bones even closer together, maybe creating more of a rub. They might prefer, let's just use a little bit of this. It controls the movement, blocks it a little bit, but it's not going to really compress the joint or the carpal bones together. Okay, so just be thinking about that.